review for the Roto Grip Gem. I'm going to get a few details out of the way first, then we'll talk ball reaction. Angel's layout's the same as always, 4 5/8 by 3.5 by 2.5. It's a pretty dynamic layout, but not overwhelmingly strong. It gets her plenty of traction and a strong roll, but also a good amount of shape too. It's a really balanced layout. My layout is my typical ASIM layout as well, 4 3/4 by 3.5 by 3.5, which is also pretty strong, but it splits the difference between pin up and pin down, which gives me a bit of blend down lane. I don't need any help with shape, but I also don't want to give too much RG away, so this is the best of both worlds. Keeps the reaction strong and rolly without being too sharp or too smooth on the back end. The Gem has the lowest RG of any ball Roto has produced at 247. That makes the ball really want to rev up and roll strong and early. Big diff at 053, lots of flare, and a kind of medium intermediate differential at 016, which provides extra torque down lane from the asymmetry of the Defiant LRG core. 2000 grit surface, microtrack solid cover, so same base formula as the cover from both the UFO and the Halo going back. This version of it feels stronger than the previous versions to me. Looking at the ball reaction with Angel first, we filmed on 2 different patterns. This is the 2019 USBC Open Championships doubles and singles pattern, 42 feet, which is on the long side of medium, 28.4 mils of oil, which is pretty heavy. As you watch it get back from the gutter here a few times, one fun fact is that lane machines can't oil the one board on either side of the lane, so there will always be friction on the one board. It might make you nervous to put it out there, but with a pattern of this length and volume, it allows you to execute a nice relaxed shot, so even with a ball this strong, it lets you roll the ball to the spot rather than having to throw it or fling it, so getting the ball out that far is a little more comfortable in reality than it might sound or look like. Another point about this too, the Gem is the right ball for these conditions. It's not going to be this long or this sharp on the house pattern because it has a lot less oil than this. Heavy oil balls like this usually need a lot more oil to get down the lane because they're built to create so much of their own friction. The oil helps offset the strength of the ball, which helps it retain energy for a strong move down lane, so it can use that energy to drive and hit rather than burning it earlier on a drier pattern. The shape reminds me a lot of the UFO, though definitely earlier because the RG of the UFO was quite a bit higher, so it didn't roll or rev quite as early. The Gem is built to be a tank, to dig through the heaviest of oil and give you a strong ball motion throughout the lane. Heavy oil balls have really evolved over the last decade. They handle friction a lot better now than they used to. Too much friction will still get them going way too early and maybe get them to straighten out or roll out based on the amount of friction and the angle that you're trying to overcome, but that problem has been significantly reduced with balls like the Reality that both hooks a lot but also handles friction extremely well, which increases its effectiveness and versatility. Heavy oil balls get passed over a lot of the time due to how little most people actually use them, but stuff like the Reality and the Proton PhysiX have been really popular due to the leaps being made with versatility. Next, we're going to move to the idle Helios, and the first thing I want to point out here is how easy it is to visibly see the difference in torque between a symmetric and an asymmetric core with these two balls. Extreme Track Solid on the Helios is technically the stronger cover, though not by much. It's also pretty easy down the lane for how much it hooks. However, it's similar enough to Microtracks, being an evolution of the same formula, that you can see the difference the core creates. The Helios goes a couple feet longer and is a rounder shape. It's not necessarily slower, it still pops pretty good, still gets plenty of traction, still reacts well. It's just that the torque from the asymmetric core helps to kick the ball at the end of the pattern. It generates extra strength to make sure it gets there. The downside is that ASIMs are less forgiving when you get slow or tug it. You can sometimes get away with that with symmetrics, but ASIMs give you forgiveness the opposite direction and allow you to stay firm and confident with your shot making because you know the ball is going to make the corner. Either one of these two are a great option for the fresh on this pattern. It really depends on your game and the angles you like to play. Moving to the house shot, this is where the Gem really stunned both of us. Virtually 100% of the time when we get a ball like this to review, it's unusable, so we go out and get the footage, and they go right back in the box. She doesn't need the traction, and I already have enough hook and shape, so ASIMs period just don't see much time for either of us. However, for the amount it hooked and for how good it looked on the Nationals pattern, it was definitely more ball on the house shot, but it was surprisingly throwable. It's such a stable rolling ball that it blends everything, and the Microtracks cover, which is very close to Storm's NRG, already handles friction well. I've noted that as an impressive attribute of the cover for years, but this might be the best I've seen this strong of a ball blend and retain strength and just not bleed any energy, period. The Reality, which we'll see compared later with me, handles friction extremely well too, but it's just too much everything most of the time. The Gem is just calm, controlled power. The response time is perfect. It allows the gem to read the dry boards without jumping or jerking, which keeps it from burning up, gives it time to stabilize and turn while having a really strong move. It's not just kind of hitting the back end and slowly or lazily rolling up, and it's not really booming, it's just such a refined and versatile reaction. Looking at the Helios now, it again shares most of the same attributes. It's not bleeding or burning any energy either. The extreme tracks cover is pretty easy down the lane for how much it actually hooks, but as you watch the shots here with the Helios missing the torque, it just doesn't seem to have the same conviction down lane. It rolls well, but isn't quite as blendy. It's pretty quick on the friction, but as soon as she's a little firmer with it, it doesn't quite make it back. She makes the adjustment towards the end, but without the torque to pull it back up the hill, it's not quite as consistent. So once the gem becomes too much ball, she would probably ball down into something like a UFO alert. Still asymmetric, still round and controllable, but much easier down the lane. It puts the reaction in a better place for her. The gem is at the top of the bag. Obviously, they don't come any stronger than this. We have it stronger than both the Proton, PhysiX, and Reality, though both of those are a bit faster. The Ultra Reality is a good step down, but if that's even still a bit too strong, like I mentioned, the UFO Alert's a good solid step down for a similar reaction type, similar shot shape, just less strength. Moving to the other side, lefties live from 2 to 5 board at the breakpoint on tougher patterns. There's enough shape inside that we already play a breakpoint around 5 on house shots, and with tougher conditions being flatter, we have to get even further outside than that if we're playing straighter angles. The gem looks just as good for me as it did for Angel, if not better. There's no track over here at all. That's why a lot of the lefties use surface and urethane to try to find some kind of control or stability in the mid lane and to calm down all the shape we have down lane. The gem is absolutely perfect on this shot. Because of my expectations, I think you could see early that I was getting really fast at release, but once I saw it was getting down the lane, pulling back up strong from the friction if I got it out to one board, and saw how well it was controlling the oil and just dominating the lane, I got comfortable pretty quickly. This feels like one of those balls that's going to be consistent from house to house and pattern to pattern. You can't get a whole lot different in terms of reaction than this pattern and a house pattern, and it does the same thing on both, or it has the same reaction shape and characteristics. Some balls are more responsive, especially balls with weaker covers. They're much more dependent on friction or dry boards for their ball motion, so depending on the combination of lane friction, topography, and the pattern choice, some balls can be pretty strong some places and pretty weak other places on somewhat similar conditions. The gem feels like it's going to do what it's going to do no matter what. Excessive friction, of course, will just make it be too much ball sometimes, but if you find a volume of oil it can't handle, nothing else you have is going to hook more. You might find something that shapes a little more, like the two we'll look at here in a minute, but I think this resets the bar for the strongest ball I've thrown. I think you can see it's not just hook in a box though, it's very effective from any place on the lane. It shapes the same from straight up as it does from fourth arrow, angle doesn't seem to affect it, it still revs up and pulls up and drives. I feel like I could have just uploaded the video and set it to music and you'd have gotten the point with this one without me saying a word. We're going to look at both the Proton and Reality here on both this pattern and the house shot so you can get a good feel for how it relates to them. The Proton is extremely popular. We've seen it a lot from the pros, Chris Vi most notably, and with the NEX cover on it, the combination of length and traction and shape makes it extremely versatile as well. The durability of the cover also helps it maintain its reaction longer than most other reactive covers, so up to this point it's been probably the best representation of a hook monster that you could use on a wide variety of patterns of all kinds of lengths and difficulties. We see them on TV fairly regularly, and I see them at League 2. Usually that's not a thing with the big solid ASIMs. In the past, you'd never see something this strong on TV. Few notes with the Proton that I think you can already see. It's faster on friction, but not quite as strong in the oil, and it wants to go a little straighter off the end of the pattern, but part of this could be the layout. This was my old ASIM layout of 5 by 3.5 by 2.5, so a little longer on the pin, but shorter on the pin buffer. I noticed that this was the reaction I was getting out of stuff. Everything was a little long through the fronts and a little straight off the end of the pattern. With my new layout of 4 3/4 by 3.5 by 3.5, a little stronger pin to start it up a bit sooner, a little slower, or a little more blend off the friction with the longer pin buffer. It still looks pretty good once I open up the lane a little and can play with the shape. The gem definitely looks better, but if I had a higher rev rate a la Chris Vi, it offers a clean and almost angular look while still having enough traction and dig to control this amount of oil. Watching the shape the Proton manages to get, it's easy to forget it's getting it on this volume. Next is the Reality, which has my new ASIM layout on it, so same layout as the Gem, and you need to pay a lot of attention to this comparison. The Reality is sexy, there's just no other way to put it. When you ace one with the Reality, I don't think you get a prettier reaction out of any other ball on the planet. Now I think you'll also notice that it's really fast on the back end. Now, I don't think it's as quick as the Proton, and what I mean by that is that the Proton hits friction and instantly goes, it instantly picks up. The Reality hits the friction and pauses for a fraction while it turns over, then it almost accelerates like it's coming off a trampoline. Part of it is the ball differences, but I think you can also see the subtle difference from the layout too. The Reality is a little earlier and a little blendier. The Reality is a really bold reaction, but it's also somewhat hard to control. I have to both throw it faster and put less on it while getting it dangerously close to the gutter for the amount of speed and lower rev rate. When I open up the lane a little, I can bring the speed down and the revs back up, but I still have to shoot it at the ditch fast or it just won't get down the lane. At the same time, I have to have a lot of touch to keep it from going too long. The Proton and Reality both look more dynamic, but as soon as I add the Gem back in, it's just a more mature reaction. That's the best way I can describe it. It hits on all the right things, it blends the lane really well, both front to back and side to side. It manages the oil and the dry equally as well, and I could say that I think it looks the best of the three on this pattern, but I think you can see it too. The Proton and Reality have bright spots for sure, but overall, from zone to zone and shot to shot, the Gem just imposed its will. Onto the house shot, and right off the bat, throw it right at the friction, it stabilizes, pulls up, and drives. Like I said about Angel on the house shot earlier, stunned is the word. You just don't have balls this strong that pull up and drive through the pocket from fourth arrow on the Nationals pattern on all that volume and that length, and then handle all this friction like this. What the Proton and Reality do later is no surprise, and the straighter zone for the Gem isn't necessarily comfortable, but because I can put it into the friction without it either turning sideways or just dying, it's surprisingly manageable. When I move in, it's game over. I've whined for almost 2 solid years now about how tight the left side of the lane is, we don't have a track, there's shape for days, I fight constantly to get the angles right, but the Gem makes me look like the biggest liar and fraud out there, and I'm okay with that. The strongest ball I've been able to throw in League for probably the last year is the Phase 3. I can't throw the Helios, the Axiom, RSTX1, occasionally the Alert and X2 make it out, but not for long. I'm usually in the P3, Spectre, IQ Tour, or Hustle Camo, but this ball is going to League. This is the absolute dumbest look I've had on this side of the lane since I switched, even vaulting above the Pro Motion, which can be a little slow sometimes. And for good measure, here's the full speed shot of the one from the opener that I walked out. I just had to fling it somewhere left of the head pin and watch the X pop up on the board. Proton is up next, and it does the same thing it does on the Nationals pattern, just a lot more of it. More friction to work with, so you can see the quick response of the Proton, and while it's obviously not the right zone to be in here from straight, again, it's manageable. The Gem looked better, but once I start moving in, it gets a lot better. The angle and higher volume of oil in the middle helps the shape quite a bit. The house pattern is about 40 feet and around 20-21 mils, so a couple feet shorter and a lot less volume than the Nationals pattern, but on tougher shots the oil is more spread out from side to side, while the majority of the oil on a house shot is in the middle, so there's actually a higher volume of oil on these inside boards on the house shot than on any board of the Nationals pattern. This is what makes house shots both easier and tougher sometimes. If you miss inside, the ball will slide more, if you get it out it hooks more, but sometimes the ratios get out of whack and you have a lot of dry next to a lot of oil, and that can give you what we call the cliff or really wet dry conditions. Inside on the oil, the Proton looks okay, but I have to make sure to get around it because of it wanting to straighten out on the friction, and with the abundance of friction on this pattern, it requires extra effort to make it work, but I can make it happen. The Proton's probably the weakest look of the three for me, but again, if I had a higher rev rate, the ball naturally wanting to straighten out down lane can help balance out the bigger rev rates that often can't get stuff to stop. Getting the traction and then having the ball want to settle into the pocket offers the balance that something like a Reality might just not quite get done. Speaking of the Reality, just shape and dig and wheels for days. Again, some of these individual shots are the sexiest ball reaction you'll ever see, but it requires such absolute perfection out of me to get them that it's not realistically repeatable consistently. It's so fast on friction and so responsive overall that I can't really roll the ball, or I feel like I have to throw it or really concentrate on keeping my speed up, and it can throw my rhythm off. it forces me deeper, and then it can be a little clean sometimes. The Proton or Reality, I think, do kind of back up my story about the left side being tighter. These are really strong, rolly, controllable balls to begin with, and to see them at 2000 grit still almost be sensitive is odd. I'm still trying to train my brain to accept ball reaction on this side of the lane. Shiny stuff really gets me into trouble, and you know how much I like my shine. A few of these shots are straight up goosebumps, but as much as I want to throw it, I just need more control. With more natural blend on the right side, the Reality can give some the best reaction they've ever had out of a ball. However, once again, add the gem back in and there's just no contest, especially on the house shot. I'm not going to say it's the best of the three objectively, it's the best for me, obviously. It might be too early and slow on some surfaces on the right side, especially older ones, or if you have lighter volume, but I wouldn't imagine someone looking at a ball like this for a daily driver in League anyway. Somehow it's possible, but if you're looking at the gem for heavier volume conditions, I think it's the earliest and smoothest of the three, but also the most controllable and versatile. The Proton likes the third arrow zone the best, and you can't get too deep for the Reality, but the gem does it all. The gem releases on March 11th, and by now you know I give it to you straight. I don't pull any punches, and if you think this is a typical staffer review hyping up the new ball, you just haven't been around long enough, but I'm really impressed with this one. With the amount of shots I showed in this video and the number of balls I compared it to on a couple different patterns, you can see it yourself anyway. Start the video over again, turn the sound off, and just watch and see what impression you come away with. Thanks for watching, and may the strikes be with you.